Welcome, everyone. Let's give 1 more minute for our audience to join in. And again, it's shared. If you have questions, please do start putting in. And this is an AMA session. So feel free to type your question into. We already have some. And by the way, for some of you that joined a little bit late, we are performing a live Ask Me Everything question, anything question. And as we prepare for the session, we have gathered quite a bit of question already. So you may see we merge in both live questions and collect the prep questions into one as we categorize them. So now 2 minutes in, I want to officially kick it off. Welcome everyone to the CPO series. And then we actually in the mini series around product operating excellence. And my name is Becky Flint from Dragonboat. For some of you who are not familiar with the Dragonboat, it is an AI native product operations platform that enables everyone in a product operating model, which actually include from CPOs to product managers, product operations, their teams, engineering, and go-to-market team together that we will set strategies, build portfolio roadmaps, and deliver products that delight customers and accelerate business outcome. That's why we're here. So our product ops copilot, which has been running in production for over 5 years now, for thousands of teams and billions of product and engineering investment running in Dragonboat platform. So in addition to being a platform enable best decisions, we are also a partner to your success. That's why we have these sessions to talk through how we can adopt best practice and learn from each other to drive better outcome. With that, I'm delighted to introduce our guest today, Rick Porter. Rick, welcome. And so for some of you, just a little bit background of Rick. Rick is a seasoned business and product operations executive. Currently, he is the VP and head of product operations at the GitHub, where he focuses on scaling operations and driving excellence. With leadership experience in New Relic, Adobe, Marketo, Rick also co-founded Endgame Inc., leveraging social data to solve business challenges. He previously managed a portfolio of analytic applications at SAP, overseeing the entire product lifecycle from ideation to global launch and field enablement. Wow. Rick started his career at the Big Five consultant at Arthur Andersen and holds an MBA and a BBA in corporate finance in the Mays Business School at Texas A&M University. So excited to have you here. As a transition, I would love to hear from you, Rick, on how you get into product and product ops throughout your amazing background. And then with that, we're going to kick off the rest of the Q&A. So off to you, please, Rick.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. This is a topic that is clearly near and dear to my heart. So happy to join and, kind of add to the collective body of knowledge here. Yeah, so as you already hit on, Becky, I started out in the era of, I was consulting, but it was around the time that data warehousing and data marts and business intelligence was the term that was being thrown around. And I was just fascinated with the power of data to drive decision making and really over time, like how do you link that to strategy? And those things were just a part of my consulting progression. And I had an opportunity once I joined a smaller company that ultimately was acquired by SAP to make the transition into product management, which lit a different fire, but it was still about data and performance management. I was so excited, in fact, that I was like, I got to go start a company doing this kind of stuff. And after a 7-year journey, as I say, I spent too much of that time writing checks to myself. So I was like, I got to go do something different. And an opportunity at Marketo presented itself. And we didn't even call it product operations. But the journey started there and we were acquired by Adobe. And what I've I wish that I could say all of that was architected. It wasn't. The truth of the matter is that I really started like the combination of data for problem solving purposes and solving complex cross-functional challenges that organizations faced was at the crux of all that I have been doing throughout my career. And what better place to take that skill set and start to apply it. And so once I got into the world of product operations, the rest is history, as they say. And this is such a rich space for that kind of problem solving. So that's why I'm so excited about, kind of doing what I do.
This is awesome. So now you're at GitHub, one of the most, well, the leader, right? In not only in the dev tool almost everywhere, also around the AI. So there were a lot of questions in today's world on people's mind. How
Mhm.
does it all coming together in terms of when you build a product that's evolving so quickly? And,
Mhm.
in the market and technology is changing every day. At the same time, you also have, this GitHub tools being used by a very large community of users. So how do you see, how do you get to a company in sometimes the technology or dev product companies don't necessarily kind of connect to the product ops. So tell us a little bit journey of, how was how the need was identified in terms of need of product ops, and what are some of the challenges that the organization needs to address, and how do you see how things evolve? I know there were questions around, when the company need the product operations and so forth. I'm gonna just sort of categorize into similar, say, when that need came around and how some of the challenges that you're balancing.
Yeah, yeah. Specifically in the case of GitHub, but I think there's general truth in what I'm about to say. Like when you are a fast growing but pretty large enterprise, it really underscores the need for making sure that you have some level of consistency and that you actually have an operating model so that you can scale, right? And that was really a big part of what attracted GitHub to me is they knew that, look, the PDLC kind of processes, like we need to be better about how we launch products. We need to be consistent in how we do that. We need to have a roadmap that is continuous and we need to be able to communicate what we're investing in to our customer base. And we need to solve for all of the underlying kind of operating model dynamics that make for a large company. The other kind of parallel that I've noticed in my journey is a lot of these companies are crossing the chasm from once having been like explosive growth startups into the world of, hey, we have as many big enterprise customers, so we have to show up in certain ways, right? And kind of balancing that, I think, is one of the markers of like, hey, we really have to get the factory, if you will, in good working order and making sure that it allows us to kind of strike this balance where we have the velocity that we need to respond to a very dynamic market that we compete in, but we also have just enough of the lean process to give repeatable and great outcomes for, our customer base.
This is so interesting that the pattern I also heard is the complexity of the organization is where you really need a dedicated mind to solve that need, right?
Yeah.
And the other part you saw, the crossing the chasm, I think it's also something I heard quite a bit as well in terms of organizations that, they can make it do. And to a certain point that sort of the balance between make do at cost to the cost is so high that you cannot make do. So I think this is really cool. Now, related question is how do you see, it sounds like you talk about the lean process a little bit, like we need to organize in the way to work. You also talk about velocity. That's not necessarily velocity of like a sprint burn down, right? You really think about how organization. So double click on that a little bit because sometimes the people tend to process, it's a word that has different opinions, right? Velocity is another thing that people feel like, oh, feels like a feature factory. But I'm sure you have really good explanation and clarification on both of these terms.
Yeah, yeah. So I think of velocity as strategic velocity, right? So how quickly can we and I'll use agile, but not in a pure agile sense, like how can we turn what is this kind of aircraft carrier at some point, right? And make sure that we can get to the right destination. One of the stories that I share frequently is back when I was at Adobe, we got a new president, and he recognized there was a pretty massive gap in our portfolio that was a part of like what was going to define the center of gravity for the digital marketing space, specifically for B2B. And he said, we have to go and solve for this immediately. Well, this is really where resource management comes into the mix because we had a discipline of understanding really where all of our engineers and product managers were working. And we were able to, in very short order, say to him, look, here's the list of the things that as product leadership, we think could be trade-offs that we can make to go attack this new space. And we literally in 2 weeks made the decision to move over 50 engineers onto this highly strategic project that was aimed at 6-month delivery of a beta at Adobe Summit. And I think in large part, that understanding, that discipline of resource management, it seems kind of boring, on some level, but it is so incredibly important because as I used to say as a consultant, put your money where your strategy is. Well, in a product context, that's more often than not just the engineers and PMs. Those are the people, right? And so the more dynamic. So when I say velocity, that's the kind of velocity that I'm talking about where you can shift on the fly. If you fast forward to where we are in the market today and the rapid shifts and all of the investment that is flowing into AI, it creates a dynamic where we have to be pretty nimble as GitHub, even as one of the leaders in the space. And so those disciplines, I think, are, things that have been there forever, but they're so incredibly important.
I love it, especially when you say put your money where your strategy is. I think there's some of our audience that also agree with that as well. And that really kind of sort of showcase a little bit of your background, right? That's how you carry your experience and knowledge into your new roles. And I really, really love the term you use here, which is called a strategic velocity. I think a lot of times the people don't necessarily they think about processes for the sake of the process versus that's the enabler
That's
for the
right.
strategic velocity. And the strategic velocity is around prioritization, market opportunity, and so forth. So I think
That-
you kind of briefly touch upon two of the questions or some of the audience ask, which is how do you help with the strategic prioritization at the GitHub and or obviously previous roles. So let's double click on that a little bit on, you kind of talk about an Adobe example of how you identify a market opportunity and you were able to see how you reallocate your investment. So now at the GitHub, how is that done? Is it very similar, or was it before and after?
Yeah, so there are common threads that you will pull through each of the company examples, but we have semester planning, which is biannual in nature, and that's where we look at what we're doing strategically. I'm a big believer in not having strategy that is this thing that lives outside of, the operational realities. Strategy gets translated, and I don't care if you use an OKR framework or if you have some other management kind of performance management system in place. But it is important that you translate that strategy into, kind of objective chunks. And we spend a lot of time as a part of our planning cycle making sure that we outline the walk from these are the outcomes that we want to drive in the business, to this is how we're going to actually measure how we're performing relative to those outcomes. And then these are the investments. This is where you put your money where your strategy is, right? And if you have the line of sight from where you're making investments to the expected outcomes that you hope to drive with those investments, that's where ProdOps is the facilitator, and making sure that that top-down strategic meets the more bottom-up granular initiative level and forces it into, a cohesive plan that we can go and execute for that semester. And, I think that as we've seen, the market is so dynamic, we have to be ready to reevaluate those plans mid-semester as well. And so the more that you have it kind of a system, if you will, in place of documenting, capturing, and monitoring over time, you can apply the same discipline that I was describing in the Adobe example from earlier.
This is a really, really cool. And I want to double click on that because a lot of times the people tend to use the word OKR it's sort of like on the lipstick format, right? And then I'll be like, okay, here's our OKR, then let's just go. And then what you actually call out is a very very advanced product portfolio management approach, right? So you have your goals, great. That tend to be OKR sometimes, right? You can be your measurement, that's fine.
Yeah.
There's the initiative and strategy part you actually call out very clearly. I think that makes a lot of sense for some of our audience. Sometimes I tend to also talking to other product ops professionals, it tend to be something more like I have OKR, I have my roadmap, and then I execute. The resource, the allocation, and wasn't part of the mix, so that there's no quote unquote strategy, right? You shake your head. So double click on that a little bit. And what are you seeing some of the organization, they may not be like, they kind of like on the surface did all that stuff, but they actually missed sort of the true impact of the things they are not doing.
Yeah, it's why OKR programs can be so, quick to collapse, because it's more symbolic, or it's more about some other aspect of, what the executive leaders are asking for versus an operating system that you're trying to put in place, right? I care about the strategic roadmap as as a game plan for how we're executing the strategy. And each of those line items that are on the roadmap are, our investments in the future. And they're there for a specific reason, right? It can influence multiple outcomes, but the reality is, as a PM and as PM leadership, you should really understand what part of the overall strategy and what part of the outcomes, whether it's ARR or MAU, it doesn't matter. Having the discipline to be very, clear in terms of how those relationships work, I think is how you create an operating model. And, if you have those initiatives as the fuel, you can then kind of link to, well, how are we doing from a feedback perspective? Are these initiatives consistent with the kind of feedback that we're getting from our customers? What does our launch calendar look like? And how are we, driving discipline and making sure that we're actually taking what we've spent all these precious investment dollars in and making sure that it is cross-connected in the business, so that it's not just the hard work of product and engineering not being met with the right kind of enablement or the right kind of marketing support. And those are roles where, ProdOps really shines in creating those connections to the broader organization. At the end of the day, it's all about executing. And the more that that execution is aligned with the strategy, the better off you are and hopefully realizing those goals that you set for yourself.
Wow, this is really cool. I want to just unpack because you touch upon so many things, and that touch also upon answer some of the questions at different angles. I just want to highlight. So one of the aspects you call out is really around working with the different people, right? So a lot of times we've seen product ops tend to kind of gravitate to working internally with the product engineering team. There's the sort of the service mentality to make my product managers more successful, give them the tools they need. this is good, right? So it's a given, but that's not enough. A lot of times it's how do you make them truly successful in terms of working with the business. So we're gonna double click a little bit on the stakeholders. Your, when you go to organization, how you up level your product ops practice so that, who are your key stakeholders and how you work with them, especially strategic level. The second part you also call out is around not just the product software delivery, right? You talk about the launch calendars, the business to customer. So would also want to double click on that a little bit. And last but not least is about customers. You already talked about the customer feedback and so forth. We'll also want to hear a little bit of how you typically kind of put that together, right? For your organization and then also for your own team as a product ops.
Yeah, yeah. So uh, keep me honest on answering every component of this. I always say to my teams, and I say this wherever I am, execution fails in the seams. So I want to establish that because the collaboration model has got to be at the center. I think of ops as bridge builders and connectors. And so if we understand that if product could just go and act on its own accord and nothing that they did needed any support from any other part of the organization, the world would be so much an easier place to operate, right? Maybe even ops is not as relevant in that space, but nothing could be further from the truth, right? And so if we start with this mindset that execution fails in the seams, then we understand the importance of establishing and building those bridges to CSM and support on one hand, revenue and GTM operations on the other. Obviously, product and engineering is a big part of why we exist in terms of helping to facilitate and build those bridges. And then that's also up to the C-suite to make sure that all of those issues of, cross-functional collaboration and interlocks are being serviced. And so, that is to me, especially in a fast growth scaling environment, if you're not mindful of those things, that's where the balls hit the floor. And so that's where I feel like, we start. And that actually dictates how my personal playbook works. I spend 6 months just building relationships, reaching out to all of the actors in the organization that are at the leadership level and, a couple of levels down from that, just to make sure that we have a good mesh with those organizations, because at the end of the day, that's how you actually go about driving successful launches, right? I just had a conversation this morning with my partner on the revenue side, and we were, just kind of sharing some of the fruits of that collaboration that started really when I started at GitHub. And I think that those are the things that paid huge dividends when you have those cross-functional collaborations. I always also say we're in the people business here, right? Like we're about connecting people across functions and across teams. And the more that we kind of pay our proper kind of, respects to that part of what we do, it's the gift that just pays you back again and again. So I'm sure I'm sure, please help me, Becky, with the other part of the question that I didn't
Yes.
address. All right.
100%. So, I think one of the things you're really talking about is the impact of the product ops, right? It's an execution fail and a seam. I love that. I'm definitely going to quote you on that one. Is that the seam is not just the function; it's also different levels, right? So, from you could be a individual contributor to a manager to a director, and then you go to the C level. Each level, there are things that miss the context and others. So want to just take that opportunity, go to the how, not just thinking about, obviously you are, many years of experience, you work with executives. What about someone who are relatively newer? Or newer in maybe just a few years into product ops journey and our organization are relatively not the level of maturity. How can they improve, stand out, and get to the level of impact that you have?
Well, I think that, if I were to decode it, and I just had a conversation with someone that I'm mentoring yesterday, and I basically said the same thing, right? Like, you're already in a position of managing some cross-functional teams as a program manager. And that gives you an opportunity to learn about the different players and the seats and the things that they care about. Frame what you're doing that way, right? Because that is the perspective that is oftentimes missing and that program managers can bring to the table. I think that's a great setup. The other piece of advice that I was giving is the power of narrative and storytelling. I think that one of the things that is an opportunity that is oftentimes missed is developing in this space. And I credit, like, if you're a consultant, it forces it on you in a sense. But it is a powerful tool that will help you and C-suite kind of dynamics. It will also help you in selling ideas or influencing others, which is a big part of what we do. So for folks that are into it, early into their prod ops career, I would tell them, make sure that you're understanding and not like superficially, but like dig into what customer support cares about, dig into what the revenue team cares about. That understanding will serve you well and will be a big part of how you can continue to progress your career and absolutely invest in whatever it takes, right? Because sometimes that's hard for people, but the more that you can stitch together the stories, it's how the human brain processes, and it's so rich and engaging that the more that you can bring that skill to the table, I think that it is an accelerator for prod ops professionals.
This is super, super cool. And oh my gosh, we have so many questions, but we don't have enough time. So I would use this sort of the last slide to wrap up today's conversation. And hopefully we're also engaged with you in different channels. As you know, Dragonboat is a platform to run your entire product operating model and enable product operating excellence. As you can see, this diagram actually illustrates how different parts of your product operations, right? From strategy to your customer feedback, to resource management, to your PDLC, to your product portfolio roadmaps and execution. Guess what? There are themes. These themes sometimes it works well, sometimes not. So connect them in terms of data. Data will enable you to see things you don't see, also enable you tell the story, because with the data, your story is more enriching, regardless it's the execution, it's a strategy, resource allocation. So I'm super excited to really talk about how Dragonboat and taking this data format and to enable you to make more data-driven decisions, tell stories to your team, stakeholders, and others. And if we were to say the future, Rick, I always thought, with AI, with things coming through, there's a lot of co-pilot coming through, right? So how do we make better decisions? We will never miss the human part of it,
That's
because
right.
you have to build relationship to explain to people who may not understand as deeply. But when you have a platform that enable the data, you bring in, you can actually talk to your different roles, right? Regardless, it's a business, it's a finance, and others. So here is where you can find Rick. If you have any questions, reach out. And Rick, any parsing one, I also have a QR code if you want to know how Dragonboat's AI Copilot will help you to get the data you need to make decisions, communicate with others, and check in with us and make a demo. So any parting words, Rick?
Yeah, I just thank you for having me. The questions are great. I think that, what Prod Ops HQ and Dragonboat are doing for the space is critical to kind of pushing the function forward. And I'm just so thrilled to be a small part of just contributing. So hopefully this was useful for everyone. And if you do have questions, as Becky alluded to, I'll be happy to kind of take some of those questions offline.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rick. And thank you all for joining us. And one last parting word I would say is, if you're not yet a product ops, uh, to me and to Rick, we believe this is a very enriched journey to be able to help so broad, not just one team, one function. It's a really broad business. Now, if you are not in the product ops role, you're a leader in product technology, guess what? Your power can be so 10x, right? Or broader when you have the right product ops and have the right process and tools, the strategic velocity for your business to be successful. So definitely think about it. I'm super excited to see the community growing and to see leaders can share their success as well. Thanks, everyone. Until next time, have a good rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.